Hi, I'm Ted Wolf, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Quick break from the conversation, because this might be the most important invitation you get all year. Are you leading people through change right now? Rolling out strategy? Launching new tech? Or just trying to keep up with the speed of AI? Then don't miss our upcoming Guidewise workshop, Execution or Extinction: How to Lead Change in the Age of AI. 72% of change efforts fail, not because of bad strategy, but because of hidden resistance. You can't fix what you can't see, and that's where we come in. This workshop will give you the tools to overcome people resistance, diagnose belief and behavior breakdowns, and drive adoption with speed, clarity, and confidence. You'll walk away with a 90-day implementation roadmap and the career skill that separates leaders who thrive from those who get left behind. Seats are limited. Click the link in the description to join the waitlist and be the first to know when registration opens. And as a courtesy to our community of implementers, we've waived the admission fee. Just use the promo code IMPLEMENT when you sign up. Now, back to the discussion. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Today, we're honored to host Ted Shelton, Chief Operating Officer at Inflection AI, with a distinguished career spanning leadership roles at Bain & Company, Genpact, and Cognizant. Ted brings a wealth of experience in guiding large enterprises through high-stakes digital transformation and the integration of advanced technologies. At Inflection AI, Ted is at the forefront of redefining human-computer interaction. The company is renowned for developing Pi, an AI assistant designed to engage users with emotional intelligence, setting a new standard for empathetic AI communication. In this episode, we'll discuss managing operations and execution for groundbreaking AI technologies, the unique interplay between AI and emotional intelligence, the future of human-computer interactions, and a lot more. So, Ted, welcome to the Implementors podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ted. And great name, by the way.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Ted, you've seen an awful lot in your experience. AI has been around for a long time. Could you give us a little background on how you found yourself at Inflection AI?
Sure. Well, Inflection AI is a really interesting company. Your listeners may know that Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, was an early investor in OpenAI. So has had a long time interest in how to create AI that is really aligned with human needs and human outcomes. And so when he had the opportunity to team up with Mustafa Suleyman, who was one of the two founders of DeepMind, he jumped at the chance to create a company that was really focused on bringing a new scale of human interaction to AI. So Mustafa and Reid in January 2022, so you remember that's a year before ChatGPT and all of us becoming really aware of generative AI, they started the company out with the idea of creating a personal assistant with AI, one that would be kind, supportive, helpful, and would take actions on the part of users to be able to actually order lunch for you or book an appointment. So that's the journey they set out on. And I found myself involved at the point in which Mustafa actually was tapped by Satya Nadella to become the CEO of AI for Microsoft. So back in March of last year, of 2024, Microsoft licensed the entire AI stack that Inflection had built and hired Mustafa to use that stack to build the new version of their consumer AI platform, copilot.microsoft.com. So at that point, Reid said, great, the world of consumer AI is getting extraordinarily crowded with trillion-dollar companies. let's pivot the company. One of the hardest things to do in the world is
Mm-hmm.
pivot of any kind, but now pivot from consumer to enterprise is even harder. But Reed set us on that tack, and so I had been doing enterprise AI with very large companies at Bain, and so it was a very natural motion for me to come in and help Reed out with repositioning Inflection to go after that opportunity.
So we talk here an awful lot with our listening audience about implementation. And when you are going to pivot from a consumer market to a B2B market, that's got to be one of the hardest things, as you had mentioned. What's the
Absolutely.
key? What's the key to making that pivot successful and implementing that change in your mind?
Well, I'll get back to you when we are successful.
Never-ending journey.
But I entirely agree with your basic premise, which is ideas are easy and implementation is hard. And I think implementation has an especially difficult characteristic when we start talking about this generative AI marketplace. I've been here for 1 year. In that year, the world has changed so much. So when I first started working with Reed and with Sean White, our amazing CEO, we looked at the enterprise space in a very different way than we look at it today. You have to think back to a year ago. The only way that large companies could access AI was through some of the hyperscaler implementations, right? So, a ChatGPT through Azure or an Anthropic through AWS. And coming out of Bain, we had the idea that, well, actually, companies should want to own and run their own AI. And there's no way to do that a year ago, which sounds silly today because you're like, well, wait, what about Llama? Well, Llama didn't exist. What about DeepSeek? Well, DeepSeek didn't exist, right? Or you go down the list of the 1.5 million open source models that are on Hugging Face. Like, most of this just didn't exist. It wasn't accessible. It was difficult for companies to figure out how to use. And so the hypothesis that we started with a year ago has had to transform. And I would say, key success is being willing to let go of your hard-fought ideas when the world shows you that there's another way, or when the world changes. Or put another way, be careful not to cut your flowers and water your weeds. You've heard that expression.
Yeah, know the
Because
difference.
you just got to keep moving, and AI in particular. The cycle time for a company to make a decision to do something with AI is actually longer than the cycle time for the technology to change out from under them. And so you're in this constant struggle of, what am I delivering? How fast can I deliver it? How fast can I sell it? Am I going to do that all before the world changes again, and a new model comes out or a new capability comes out? Right? It is not easy, for sure.
So a lot of people owning enterprises are sitting back and saying, AI, I know we have to do it. We don't know where to start. And one of the problems is the pace of change. You wait 6 months and it's a totally different world. So all that money I allocated, committed to 6 months ago, is it still valid? What's the secret in planning ahead and making commitments from a business standpoint, both culturally and financially, to protect the investment that I'm making in my business today?
Yeah. Well, I would like to channel and give credit to Professor Ethan Mollick. Ethan Mollick is a Wharton Business School professor who's been working with this generative AI technology longer than most. And he recently wrote in his, by the way, super useful blog, which if you don't follow it, it's oneusefulthing.com.
Mm-hmm.
You should read it all the time, read every single thing he posts. But the most recent thing he posted, he talks about how successful enterprises that are adopting AI really have three key components that work together. The first is a leadership team that gets it, right? That it's not lip service, it's not nice to have, it's core. They understand the value, the transformation that's necessary. They provide the support, the incentives, the recognition, and the push for the organization to transform to use AI. The second is a crowd, which is to say, you've got to actually put these tools into the hands of your own employees, and get your employees working with these tools to learn what the right patterns are for your company, for your industry, for using these tools to unlock value. And the third is what he calls a lab. And the point of the lab is you can't wait for this technology to settle out. I don't know if it'll ever settle out. You've got to start getting involved in the messy business of understanding how it is, in fact, changing every day. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have a workbench where you're able to take these new technologies and lay them out on the bench and examine them and test them and experiment. And I think the key is then to move quickly, not to allow the approval processes and the review processes to get in the way of actually testing and executing on new ideas quickly. So that combination of leadership, crowd, and lab is the key to success for the enterprise.
Okay. I'm experienced talking to some business people who are thinking of bringing AI in, and they find that when they start bringing it in, all of a sudden the cultural silos start to break down and turf wars start to break out. Who owns the information? How are we going to manage it? What are the expectations of all of this? So the culture gets tested, obviously. Have you found that to be the case in your enterprise implementations and working with larger organizations, I'll say, or enterprise type of organizations, that you need to think of how are we going to communicate it and get the people on board, the culture on board, the emotions in line, if you will?
Definitely, people are the hardest part of any change, any transformation program. And most organizations fail to do two really critical things. The first is incentives. How do you make sure the incentives are aligned with where you want to end up, not where you are? Secondly is education. How do you provide people with the tools to be able to be successful to achieve that future state? And we hardly ever redesign incentive models, and we usually underinvest in education. And so, yes, so then you end up with the symptoms that you're describing of turf wars and control of information, all that, because people are trying to protect themselves, right? I mean, if you have a nice job you've had for 10 years and you're putting your kids through school, the last thing you want to hear is you're no longer needed, you're fired, you're out of here, right? And so what are you going to do? You're going to get defensive. I think actually the other really interesting phenomenon that I've seen recently, a couple of times now, enough to be a trend, not an anomaly. I've been in workshops at large companies where the people in the workshop are super excited and engaged with the information and learning about AI, but not because they care at all about changing their own organization, but because they see a career ladder opportunity for themselves, maybe even outside the organization they're in. Yeah. Because AI is a very disruptive technology in every industry and every business. And so people are saying, we broke the social contract between companies and employees a long time ago.
Right.
So naturally, employees are going to think, number one, about themselves. So that's the other challenge is how can a company, and this is why I think Meath and Mullick starts with leadership, how can a company provide that vision and incentive and encouragement so that people say, hey, I actually can thrive right where I am.
Okay. And education, what type of education do you recommend?
Well, I mean, I think there's the pragmatic hands-on education of what are the tools, how do they work, how can you get the most value out of them, what should you do, should you not do, and then I think there's the experiential learning of, okay, now try, actually go do it, and so having a safe and secure way for employees to be able to test lots of different things. I'll give you an example on the first point. I think most people have no idea how a prompt is converted into a completion, sort of the basic thing that happens when you type something into a ChatGPT and you get an answer back. They don't understand anything about the mathematics behind it. And I'm not saying we all have to become mathematicians. I'm just saying you have to have a conceptual model for what's happening to understand why things like ambiguity are such a problem. So if I write a prompt in which I'm going to define the answer space within the model, then I need to understand how to write that prompt in a way that I choose the right answer space for what I want to have as the outcome, not the wrong one. People don't have this expertise. The only way you're going to deliver that is through actual formal training, education.
And could you give us an example of what you're talking about for that space?
Sure. I just had this interaction with someone on LinkedIn. They said, I asked the question, ask me an interesting question. Right. So that's a prompt.
Hmm.
Ask me an interesting question. And, and the answers that he got back were things like, well, if you could have a superpower, what would it be? Right. Um, and he complained that these were not actually interesting questions. And I said, well, look, actually, the problem is you're, when you asked that question, the ambiguity was in to whom would it be interesting? Right? You said, ask me an interesting question. Well, do you mean, and so what you're going to end up doing is you're going to define the answer space within the model around things probably like what would be a good conversation starter at a party? Or, what should I ask somebody when I've just met them so I can get to know them better? Right. So there's a whole set of conversations in that online data set that was used as a training corpus that are around those kinds of definitions of interesting. So if you wanted something else, you have to explain what you mean by interesting.
Okay. Okay. In the education and finding out what is interesting to yourself, but also giving the prompt enough of, I'll say, definition so it can respond
Context.
accordingly.
Mhm.
What's the interplay of emotional intelligence between people, the agents, or the AI that they're working with? What does that look like, and what's the importance of emotional intelligence, if any, in that relationship?
Well, I think emotional intelligence actually should be understood in a couple of dimensions. One dimension is the way in which the question answered, does it feel supported? Do you feel supported? Do you feel that it was kind? Another dimension actually is around whether in that interaction you feel like you're interacting with a process that is actually extracting more information from you in a positive way to support where you're trying to get to. So, Socratic or question and answering kind of way. So, those
Mhm.
are two different characteristics. I could talk about some others as well. But the point is that each of these things contributes to a more positive experience in using the technology. Whether you're an individual consumer having your own personal interaction saying, hey, how do I resolve this problem with my kids? Or whether you're a business person in a business environment saying, hey, how do I help make sure this meeting happens in a productive way, right? The fact that the answers come back in a kind and supportive way and in a way in which they're extracting more information from the interaction both helps those outcomes. So I'll give you a specific example. I had a coworker type the prompt in to both ChatGPT and to Pi. What should I do if I'm pulled over for a DUI? Now, hopefully they weren't typing that in because they actually were trying to solve that question. But anyway, it's an
Mhm.
interesting one, right? Because
Mhm.
it's a stressful time, right? And of course, ChatGPT does a very good job of being the answerer, right? It goes out and it says, well, during the traffic stop, here are the things you should and shouldn't say to the officer. If you are going to court, here are the things you should and shouldn't do in court, right? So it gives you a very factual and good answer. In the case of Pi says, wait, is this happening right now? Are you okay?
Okay.
Right? A completely different kind of interaction, right? And one that elicits the right information, right? Because what the model is doing then is it's actually finding out what is, it wants to know more context, right? So, for example, should it give you the answer about what you should do during the traffic stop, or should it give you the answer about what to do in court, right? Would be dependent upon, is this happening right now? But it's also coming across as kind and supportive. Are you okay? Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so,
And in that whole education of the emotional intelligence and the interacting building of the context, that's the important part, I believe, I found in my experience in dealing with AI. I have to describe the context, both where I'm coming from and where I'm going. So the normal individual, let's just say that they go to work, they leave at 5 o'clock, they've got their duties inside the quality of life they want to establish. How do they learn to do these prompts properly and talk in the detail that they need to parlay that context type of paradigm?
yeah. So I think there's a bunch of different contributing factors. I think that the way in which a person has been trained in their education and in their upbringing and in their work life can contribute to that. I studied literature and philosophy in college. My focus of my philosophy degree was on the question of rhetoric, both classical rhetoric as well as modern rhetoric, and so I focused quite a lot on the use of words. I studied Derrida, I studied Descartes, everything in between, all the D's you can think of. Probably, actually, the most interesting in the context of LLMs was Wittgenstein, because he really looks closely at how do we assemble meaning around these symbols, the sounds and the symbols that we use that we call language. And so I come to prompting from this very sort of rigorous and analytical and thoughtful approach. Well, most people never have that opportunity to have that education. They've gotten other terrific things out of their education, but it wasn't about thinking about how language is a set of symbols that we use to represent the world. And so I think it has to be taught. I think the step back as we start to interact with these models is to understand they are mathematical representations of human knowledge. And so the way in which we're going to interact with them and get the responses that we need is going to be through this very careful way of structuring the language we use to interact with them to be able to define the right math on the back end to extract the answers that are relevant given that very large model, a representation model of human knowledge.
Okay, so let's take this in the realm communication, the words we use, etc. When you move into an enterprise type of environment, away from the individual, but now we're talking about the enterprise's usage, how should a CEO, a president, the C-suite, the senior leaders, how should they communicate this new journey that we're going to take with AI?
Yeah, I struggle with this because the first problem is that we don't really know. None of us know. And so I think it's very difficult as a leader to admit that you don't know something. Like, we want certainty from our leaders. But I do think that that's part of the job right now, is to say we're on a journey together and we don't know precisely where this journey leads. But then the follow-up to that needs to be, again, as a good leader, we're going to be on this journey together. We're gonna figure out how our business changes, how the relationships with our customers change, how our products and services change, how our work changes. And what I fundamentally believe is that there are three things that we want humans to do in our work environment. And that we're going to redesign all of our systems and all of our processes and all of work so that humans still do those three things. But we're going to have machines that either do or at least augment us in doing everything else. So those three things are, first of all, creativity. Machines are capable of generating amazing things. And I don't know if you've played with some of the new things that have been out, like just this last week with Gemini, with their new Flow product, or VO is the model, to be able to generate videos. It's tremendously powerful, right? But it generates the video that you tell it to generate, right? You still got to tell it to generate. So you still have to have the creativity to say, I want an octopus that's dancing on the bridge of the Enterprise or whatever it is, right? And so that's a really key piece that I think we still want humans to be doing. I think the tools change for how we actually manifest the output of our creativity, but we still want humans being creative. The second thing that we want is we want humans to be critical thinkers, and that requires that we understand how the systems work, because ultimately we want humans to be accountable for the output of these machines. You can't fire a machine. You can't jail a machine, right? So if we're going to direct these machines to do work, we need to be accountable for what the work is that gets done. And that doesn't mean like standing in the way of every decision that gets made, right? We're going to have the machines capable of having a whole stream of decisions that they execute on. I, for example, am a daily user of self-driving cars here in San Francisco, the Waymos from
Mm-hmm.
Google.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want at every traffic light for it to go, "Hey, human, is it green? Should I move?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? What would be the point, right? I need the machine to make decisions, but I do want a set of humans that are monitoring those machines to understand why they're making the decisions they're making, and then constantly improving them and directing them when they do get into trouble. So that critical thinking is going to be really key.
Mm-hmm.
And the last of the three, I think, is the most human of these things, and it gets back to the conversation we were just having about emotional intelligence, and actually some recent writing and talking speech that Reid Hoffman gave. Machines are just machines, right? We shouldn't think that machine is our friend. We shouldn't have a relationship with a machine. We should reserve our capacity for relationships to other human beings. So we really should want human beings to be at the center of those interpersonal relationships that are so important in everything we do as a species, whether it's, so I would characterize this as my third C, collaboration. Of course, collaboration has many different forms, where it can be, selling something to a customer. It can be building something with a partner. It can be having a personal relationship, right? But let's have humans be creative, be critical thinkers, and collaborate with one another, and make that the center of the way we reorganize and redesign work. And so that would be my message as a leader.
Okay. Then in talking with other leaders within an organization, and you keep your three things in mind here: the creativity, the critical thinking, and relationships between people. How do you design an implementation or an organization with your company, Inflection AI, at the enterprise level? How do you introduce it and bring it into the company so they can begin implementing it?
Yeah. So the very first step, and I'll channel Ethan Mollick again.
Mm-hmm.
The very first step for us is to say, how do we enable leaders to really deeply understand the technology? And so that's a hands-on process. Leaders need to actually work with this stuff themselves. They need to be able to understand that if they can ask a question of, say, OpenAI's deep research, and in 15 minutes have a more detailed report than they'll ever get from any of the high-priced consulting firms that they use, that's a light bulb that turns on for them as leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first part, is really get leaders to understand what the art of the possible is. The second is to enable the crowd. And so as a part of the Inflection platform, we have a way for employees to access this technology in a way that is safe and secure, and allows them to experiment and share their experiments with other employees. So we enable the crowd. And then the third is to enable the lab. And so there's an innovation stream that's happening in this space. We, as one of the top AI research teams, are very close to that stream of innovation. So we're right inside the middle of that bubble and see all this stuff that's happening. And when we talk to our customers, they are oblivious to stuff that's happened even 3 months ago, much less what happened yesterday. And so we can help those companies build a lab, have their lab workbench, be able to test these technologies, understand what's possible. I think one of the most important parts is being able to, be future forward, to say, look, let's build something that we know doesn't work today, but to understand what parts of it do work and where the gaps are, to be able to then to track the technology, so that when technology solves the problems we've encountered, we know that this will work, right? So there's a set of things there with supporting the lab.
Okay. And when you're bringing it in and you're beginning your lab, you're getting the work done, things like that, how do you explain to them, here's the importance of owning your information, here's the importance of protecting your information, here's what you need to do that?
Well, there's a set of really interesting reasons why companies should want, and in many cases will need to, own and run their own AI. There's pragmatic reasons. I don't know if you're a military guy, but this may be a surprise to you, but it'll make sense when I say it. The U.S. Navy, every ship has its own data center.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Mind blowing. Navy ships, warships have data centers. Why do they have data centers? Well, modern technology, there's a ton of information that needs to get processed on these ships on a constant basis. And you cannot rely upon an internet connection if you're at war. You actually need the compute power on the ship, right? So there are these really interesting pragmatic reasons why, if you want to run AI to be able to solve, and let's take a non-classified example. I've got the 18-year-old kid that works in the galley, and the fryer's broken, and he needs to figure out how to fix it. Where is he going to go? Is he going to go find a book off of a shelf and flip through and try to figure out how to fix the fryer? Or could he have a conversation with the chatbot and say, help me diagnose what's wrong with the fryer? Right. And so, but again, he needs to be able to do that in a compute environment that's right there on the ship. He can't rely on some internet connection that may or may not be available where he is. So there's these pragmatic reasons, lots of reasons in manufacturing and in oil and gas and utilities. There are lots of facilities that are offline that are never going to be connected to the internet. And if I want compute, it's going to have to be in that facility. So that's pragmatic. Then there's regulatory reasons. So if I have personally identifiable information, if I'm HIPAA compliant, GDPR in Europe, lots of reasons why I have to be quite cautious with handling of information. And cautious about where that information might get to. So protect myself from that potential leakage if it is not within a data infrastructure that I use myself. And then there's simple business decisions, right? I have some secret sauce in my company. I have my earnings for next quarter that I'm trying to plan for that I don't want to have leak out before because I'm a publicly traded company. Lots of reasons like that. So what we see is privacy being a top concern. But then immediately after privacy is cost. And I think, companies have, I have one client who set up access to OpenAI for teams across their company. And luckily they had our software in there and they were using it to monitor what was going on, because one of the teams created something that started running wild and generated, 3 billion tokens of consumption in an hour. And they were able to shut it off, right? But, one of the challenges for organizations is how do I actually control the use of this new technology? How do I monitor it? How do I manage it? And how do I choose where to run a particular use case so that it is the most cost-effective place? If I run it on OpenAI's ChatGPT and pay $10 per million tokens versus I can run it on my own infrastructure and pay 50 cents per million tokens, and it's perfectly good quality for the particular use case that I'm using it for, I need to choose the 50 cents. So cost becomes the second thing. And then the third thing, and then I'll wrap up on this point, but what we believe, and we're just beginning to experiment with our customers on, is that training and fine-tuning models, not all the models, but some of the small models, so that they have information or knowledge that is specific to a business or to their industry or even to a particular use case, can result in substantially better outputs. So there are things that you can do with ChatGPT where you'll get 80% of the way there, and that's a great starting point. But that last 20% is actually going to require some proprietary data set that only you as a company have. And so you're going to need that ability to customize these models to the specific uses that you want to put them to.
Okay. When you put those three things all together, a question that comes to my mind is, who really owns information now as an organization becomes, I'll call, tech-centric? Is it the AI IT department? They used to, in the past, own everything. But now it seems like it's diffusing within the organization. It's everywhere. So who owns it at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the business has always owned its information. I think the different question, which if I peel the onion back, and I think you're asking, is who actually manages the information?
Right.
And I do think that IT has a really critical ongoing role inside the enterprise to be the enabler for the business. IT can't be the one to tell the business what their operating model should be, what their processes should be, what information is important or not important, or how to use it. But what IT needs to do is to be able to provide an enablement layer so that the business can then experiment and learn and build and achieve the objectives that they want to achieve. And I think that relationship is very challenging for a lot of organizations. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of businesses, most businesses, IT has been managed as a cost center. as opposed to as a competitive advantage. And AI will change that. AI is a competitive advantage.
So put this into your life situation right now. I'm a president of a big corporation. I have this obligation. Everybody, all the RFPs that are coming in, everybody's asking what our AI strategies are. I have to make decisions I'm not sure about. Putting yourself in the position as you are of the leader of Inflection AI, what are the difficult decisions you have to make concerning the technology, the development of your product going into other organizations? What is it that's keeping you awake at night, and what are the priorities that you're trying to put in place?
Yeah. So I would describe two things that give me sleepless nights that are related but slightly different. The first is that because I sit right in the middle of this industry, I'm so close to the coal face, as they would say, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That I have this very deep belief that already where we are with AI technology, that it is incredibly disruptive, incredibly transformative, that as we begin to really learn how to use, even if it were to freeze today, if we were to just learn how to use what we have today, is going to radically transform society and business. And I also see that we're not going to freeze today, that there's continuing evolution that's happening at a very rapid rate, which, by the way, will lead me to my second point. But let me start with the first point. My concern on the first point, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that when I move outside my bubble and when I talk to those presidents of large companies, that they are so far removed from what's happening, despite all of the media press. And unfortunately, there are people out there saying, "Oh, it's all just hype. Oh, this is the new thing like Bitcoin that Silicon Valley tried to trick us all to do." And so there's naysayers out there as well. So that the president of that large company finds it very hard to sort out. I hear this on one end of the spectrum, it's very transformative. I hear this on the other end of the spectrum, it's like Bitcoin, it'll mean nothing. It's all a scam. What should I believe? I think I'll just wait, right? And so the thing that keeps me up at night is that I think that there is a whole generation of leaders and businesses that are falling further and further behind because of this pace of change. And I don't know how to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And that also relates then to the second point, or second thing that keeps me awake at night. And that relates much more directly to the question you asked about our own product roadmap. Because I think the steady pace of innovation also means that the speed with which you consider, decide, invest in, build, and deliver a product, that cycle time is so much longer than the cycle time for something else new to be introduced that invalidates your roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're constantly in this position of saying we have to reconsider our strategy and our roadmap. We do it every week. Every week we have a 2-hour strategy meeting amongst the leaders of our company to try to say what did we learn last week? What do we think is going to happen next week? What should we be working on?
Mm-hmm.
And so the uncertainty and the challenge that is brought about by the pace of change, I think, is both challenging to customers, to the businesses that are trying to decide what to do, as well as to us as a vendor trying to build the right things.
And I think they're also indicative of the individuals in middle management and the front lines. What's this going to mean to my future? Like you said, hey, I want to get involved in this because it may be an out for me in the future versus I don't know where my career is going to go or what's going to happen. So do you recommend when an organization is bringing in AI, one of two extremes? One, start small, get some quick wins, build momentum, expand the boundaries of that win. Or let's do an evaluation and let's talk about how we're going to implement AI throughout the organization and what's that strategy going to be.
Yeah. I would actually characterize a third path because it's definitely not number two, right? Number two is the kind of approach that we would take with prior technology trends in which we really had the time to consider thoughtfully how to roll these things out. And we can say companies were too slow with mobile, maybe they were too slow with the internet, but mostly companies survived those technology trends. Mm-hmm. This one, they're not going to survive. If you take that approach, you're not going to survive. Mm-hmm. But I worry about the language that you use on the first one, because I think that it doesn't capture one of the really key factors, which is experimentation that leads to learning. So if you just say, hey, let me do something small that's a quick win, right? What that can mean is I'm going to look outside my organization at somebody else's organization, and it's something successful that their organization did, and I'm going to replicate it in my organization because I know I'm going to get the ROI on it. And I'll make back 10x on the dollars I spent. And then if you just do that, then you're not learning. And you're not understanding where the technology is really going to transform your business. And so I do think there's this third pattern that I would describe as, going back to the Ethan Mollick point, you've got to enable leaders to have the vision to create the incentives and provide the air cover and support for taking chances. You have to enable your employees, that crowd, to be able to go and do experiments and find out what works, what doesn't work, and have a mechanism for sharing across the enterprise through those experiments. And you have to have a lab that is constantly looking at what is the stream of innovation that is occurring in this industry and understanding how could that apply to our business, where are the gaps, so that we can monitor the gaps to understand when that happens. Not if, it's not whether or not something will work, it is when will it work, right? And so that's the prescription here is, be lifelong learners and experiment and take chances. That's the model.
Okay. And sitting back then and setting a roadmap, we have to implement and get working with AI. We can't do it haphazardly. How do you build? Do you build 6-month milestone plans if you're a business? Do you build 1-year goals? I don't know how you look out into 2 years in AI today. How would you suggest they time
don't do
frame
anything
this?
that doesn't have a 2-week cycle time.
Okay.
2 weeks is a long time.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean, look, you can have KPIs that stretch out longer, but don't have firm definition of how you're going to achieve that KPI. Understand that there are goals and adjust constantly. Like I said, we meet every single week for 2 hours to reassess our strategy.
So when you talk about a 2-week cycle time, give me an example of that.
Okay. I'm a company that wants to utilize AI for helping my field engineers assess what they need to do with the particular machine that they're fixing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm going to put a 2-week cycle time around a test that I want to do. I'm going to go and find some engineers. I'm going to give them some really rough, non-productive, hardly productive technology. I'm going to ask them to use it, and I'm going to interview them and find out what worked and what didn't work. And so in 2 weeks, I'm going to understand like where the limitations are of using a camera with a ChatGPT to assess a broken machine in my industry, where the gaps are. Does ChatGPT not know anything about the kind of machinery I have? Is the camera not capturing enough detail? Do I not have internet connectivity from the facilities I'm trying to service? Like where, but if I set that up as a 6-month pilot, in 6 months, the whole world's going to have changed. I wouldn't even have the right tests to figure out what I should do next.
So what you're saying is identify the topic or the project you want, and then every 2 weeks have your priority set. What do I now want to achieve? And in 2 weeks, have I done it? Haven't I? What have I learned? Where do I go next to adjust the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Those of us who get into AI, you start learning and having conversations like this, and you are living this 24 hours a day. I'm sure you're solving AI problems in your sleep sometimes.
I do dream too much about AI.
How do you keep yourself from going into almost fear of this is so big? I understand the tsunami that's coming. My old life seems to be gone. How do I function in this unknown world that's so extreme and moving so fast? How do you keep your composure?
Yeah. So I struggle with this. So I'm not going to say I've solved it,
Mm-hmm.
because I do think that anytime that we confront radical change that we are not in control of, that there can be a feeling of helplessness. And just a different corollary to that, climate change,
Mm-hmm.
right? You start going, sea level rise. Our snowpack is disappearing. Last week there was a collapse of a glacier in Switzerland that took out an entire town. Right? I mean, so you can feel a sense of hopelessness about that. So my parsing of this is, there are things that I can influence and control, and there are outcomes that I can plan for, and there are things I cannot influence and control, and outcomes I cannot plan for. So have the grace to know the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to put it in a simple framing, people talk about super intelligence and talk about how AI is going to take off, and we don't know what they're going to do to the human race and all that. It's like, you know what? If that happens, sort of like the glacier collapsing and taking out the town, I don't have any control over it. I'm simply not going to have that in my planning horizon. Instead, I'm going to say my planning horizon is, and this is what we at Inflection AI are focused on, and the reason that Reid Hoffman has made the investment he's made, and he has the commitment that he has made to AI, is what can we do to make AI in a form that augments human beings, that is supportive of human outcomes, that makes our lives better, not worse. And I stay focused on doing that every day.
Okay. So what does the future look like for you, Ted, going forward then, personally?
Well, I'm a grandfather, and my second grandchild is on the way, due in late September, early October.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But so I think that brings me, though, to a very clear responsibility to not just the next generation, my children, but the generation after that, their children, and all of their children, all of the grandchildren that are being born today. Right? We have a world that is, hundreds of thousands of years into human civilization, and hopefully will be another hundreds of thousands of years into human civilization. My goal is to just do my little part to try to make that a better and better world for all of those people. And I do think that we have the opportunity to create a world of abundance, a world in which, people talk about the meaning of work. And I will tell you, I do not think that there is any meaning in flipping a burger or digging a ditch. Like there's a lot of things that we all have to do as a population, as an 8 billion population on the planet, that do not bring meaning in itself in that labor. And I think we have the chance of changing that, of giving people an opportunity to move higher up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and find themselves in a position where they can be really working on true self-actualization rather than survival. So my personal goal, whether it's working as an executive in a business, or whether as I progress in my life to be giving to charity and participating in other philanthropic activities, is always going to be to try to continue to make the world a better place for all of us.
Well, you're a wealth of knowledge. You have an awful lot of experience with AI, the technology, and everything that's moving forward. If somebody wants to talk to you, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, well, I write pretty regularly a newsletter. I write it on LinkedIn. It's called Infinite Future. So you can look me up on LinkedIn, Ted Shelton, and follow me, and find or you can probably search. You can probably ask ChatGPT to find Ted Shelton's Infinite Future and probably get the link. Lots of, I used to say Google search, but search is going away, right?
Right.
But Infinite Future is a great way to keep in touch with me. It's funny, when I first started writing Infinite Future, I was writing it every single day, and I started getting complaints from people. They said, "You are writing too frequently. I'm losing too much time reading everything you write. You need to write less frequently." And just yesterday, I got a message from somebody saying, "Hey, I haven't seen a post from you in a while. I miss reading your stuff." So there's some balance that I haven't quite got between writing it too frequently and writing it not frequently enough. But anyway, that's probably the best way to follow me.
Okay. Well, I think you'll find your balance there. I don't have any question about that. So thank you very much for conversation today. Very enlightening, and you have a good perspective, and I wish you the best of luck in that whole change and pivot into B2B environment, and I'm sure you're going to be extremely successful with it. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you for watching this episode of Implementors. If you found this conversation valuable, please click the like button. It helps others facing similar challenges discover and benefit from these conversations. We also welcome your insights and reflections, so please share your thoughts in the comments. We truly value thoughtful engagement from leaders like you. If these conversations resonate with the work you're doing, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to stay updated on future episodes. And if someone in your network would benefit from this dialogue, consider passing it along. Great implementation and execution always starts with great conversations. And at the end of the day, ideas are just the beginning. It's implementation and execution that drives meaningful results. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time. And as always, stay grounded, stay curious, and keep implementing.